Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another installment from our webinar series, Straight from the Horse's Mouth. Jim Fava, the father of modern day life cycle assessment, has been an international leader in sustainability for more than 45 years. He's made significant contributions to how we understand and measure environmental impacts. He also takes a practical approach to LCA, knowing that an assessment can be valuable even if it doesn't comply with ISO standards. Here's a sneak preview.
All that work really was focused on building the market, building the demand for the use of life cycle thinking, life cycle information to drive better decision making. So when I look back on my career, 45 years, it's the people, it's the ability to start your own company and run your own little business. And thirdly, is to be able to pursue that volunteer work to really create the demand.
So you've basically given us the framework on goal and scope definition first, then inventory analysis, impact assessment, and then interpretation, which are the four phases of an LCA. If you had a chance to do it all over again, is there something else? Would you change some of that?
LCA is essential to give you the hotspots along that whole value chain, the whole system. But to make change, you also need to have all this other information. So LCA is essential, but not sufficient.
Now retired in Costa Rica, Jim will reflect on his career. He'll join our CEO, Barbara Nebel, to discuss the many highlights and lessons from his career and recommendations for others in the field. This will be a fascinating conversation exploring the last 50 years in sustainability and LCA. With that, let's get started.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another webinar in our series Straight from the Horse's Mouth, Insights from Experts in 30 Minutes. Today, it's my real pleasure to welcome Jim Fava as our guest. He's been with us before in webinars, and I've known Jim for, let's just say, a really long time. And he's been active in the LCA space, well, for a much longer time still. I won't spend a lot of time now giving you the full background of Jim because he will share with us some of the key reflections of his career in sustainability and LCA specifically. So I'll leave that to him. We've been working with Jim on and off for projects a long time. He's been out here to New Zealand quite a few times. We've managed to get a few workshops in. I managed recently to drag him into a project where we're doing a light explainer of LCA in a book, which is hopefully going to come out soon. I'll just say a really big thank you to Jim for giving up one of his evenings because he's now based in the beautiful Costa Rica. And I'll hand it over to you, Jim.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here and be with you all again. As Barbara said, I've been back in New Zealand 3 times, I think, over the last 6 or 8 years. Working with Barbara and Matthias and the rest of the ThinkStep group there in New Zealand, and it's been a wonderful experience for me and my wife Jane. But that wasn't my first time into New Zealand. When I was 21 years old, I had the opportunity to go around the world on an oceanographic research vessel. And we stopped in Wellington, New Zealand for 2 weeks. We had engine trouble. And so I had 2 wonderful weeks in Wellington getting to know New Zealand. This was back, I think, when they were voting on should they keep the pubs open past 5 o'clock, at night, so that was a big event that was happening when I was down there. But no, it's great to be here. And what I want to do today is to provide a little bit of reflection on my career. When I was on the technician upon the oceanographer, that was like 55 years ago. So my career started in that. And that was really the early days of the whole sort of environmental movement. I mean, it just wasn't there. And it was just beginning kind of a thing. And so I want to give a little bit of what I'm most proud of, talk a little bit about some of the key career opportunities, sort of triggers, and what were drivers in my career. and then a little bit of reflection on what I've learned and how I can maybe transfer that to others. So the three things that I'm most proud of are really, and I go back over and over again, and I look at, I talk to folks, and what are you most proud of? And I'm really most proud of the people that I've worked with, mentored, collaborated. When I look back upon their career, what they did well, what they did good, how they made their impact. And we did a thesis on from my retirement. They had a nice little website that they put together, and it's the URL is here. And we have testimonials from impact from like 30 different professionals around the world. And one of the things that they really liked was what I had done to help them in their careers, and provided sort of incentives, perspectives that really enable them to be as successful as they are. So it's really wonderful to hear and see that. So to me, the number one thing, look back in my career, is I'm most proud of the accomplishments of the professionals that I've worked with, throughout the 45 years once I post PhD. The second thing that I'm really proud of is that I've worked for other companies, and I worked for big companies, little companies, but I always wanted to have my own company. So somewhere in the late 1998, myself and three other colleagues who were active in the ISO LCA standard writing process, two from Canada and one from Germany. And we started a company called 5 Wins International. Now it's merged with PE and ThinkStep, and ThinkStep was bought by Spira, and Spira was bought by Blackstone. But that opportunity for me for like 12, 15 years was a great opportunity. We're really focused on sustainability consulting, focused on sort of a systems life cycle, perspective. And many of our clients, we didn't approach it from like, I was from the US, and so we did US work, and then we had Canadian partners, we had German partners, so we had multinational companies from all over the world: Johnson & Johnson, BASF, Armstrong, Stanley Black & Decker. But we also did work in Paris with OECD and Geneva with the World Business Council. And I'll talk about the Product Sustainability Roundtable as well. But I retired from ThinkStep in 2016, and I joined Enthesis on a part-time basis. And one of my colleagues, originally part of the 5 Wins group, called it, Jim, sort of retirement and training. It took me 6 years to sort of get trained to the point of now I'm retired. But to me, that was a wonderful journey, to really able to start your own company and follow it through. And it really created wonderful opportunities to really expand the whole life cycle product sustainability to drive business value in companies. So the third thing that I was really, really pleased about, and what I really, really felt very proud of, is that I was able to combine the actual volunteer work with paid consulting. And I guess when I looked at some of the earlier, ISO standard writing activities and the environmental management systems work that started in 1993, we have LCA, eco labeling, environmental management, a number of other categories. And what was really clear that was all early stage, where people try to figure out what is an LCA, and how do you write the standards and so forth. So we did a lot of development work as well as writing the standard. But the other thing that I thought was important was that there's a supply and demand. If you really want to get life cycle thinking, life cycle assessment embedded in decision making, you really have to grow the market. You can work on databases, you can work on modeling, you can look at software, you can look at all the things in terms of building people's skills and doing all that. But unless there's someone interested in the outcome and using the results, you may not get, the push and the impact that you want. So a lot of what I did in the work was the volunteer work. And so that started back in 1989 when I started to chair a workshop called the Technical Framework for LCA, and I'll show the slide on that in just a minute. But that created a series of what the Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry was called a sort of a Pelston workshop series. You bring 50 people together for a week, you lock the door, and you write a book on a topic. And it was very impactful. But that really created the whole foundation for modern day, LCA as we know it. But I also did a lot of work in heading the U.S. delegation, going to the International Organization for Standardization. I helped co-found the UNEP CTAC Life Cycle Initiative. Now it's a life cycle initiative hosted by UNEP. I also co-founded the Forum Sustainability through Life Cycle Innovation. But all that work really was focused on building the market, building the demand for the use of life cycle thinking, life cycle information to drive better decision making. So when I look back on my career, 45 years, it's the people, it's the ability to start your own company and run your own little business. And thirdly, is to be able to pursue that volunteer work to really create the demand for all the life cycle work that's being done, around the world. It wasn't me, but I contributed to that, and I felt very important, as that was a very important part of that. So when I look back on my career, there were 4 triggers. I tried to figure out, how do I actually do this? And there were 4 triggers that really made a difference. One was the oceanographer going around the world in 1967, 68. We left from Jacksonville, Florida, and ended up in Seattle a year later, going east, and ended up, around the world. But I realized when I went into ports around the world, miles and miles out at sea, you could smell the air. You got closer to the port, there was trash everywhere. In the cities, it was just very polluted. And I started to realize that humans had really made a major impact on the environment, and we needed to do something about it. I have no idea what that meant and how to do it. That was a focus. So I went back after the cruise. I went back to college and got my undergraduate degree, a master's in fisheries biology, and a PhD in environmental toxicology, which really became the foundation for leading the rest of my technical and paid career. The second trigger was after coming back from the trip, I met Jane, my wife. We've been married for 52 years. We just put her hands up, say she's very happy. So am I. But the impact really was, one, we created a very extended family, and it created a passion for protecting the environment, starting with ensuring safety of our family through 5 generations, from my parents all the way down through grandkids and great grandkids and so forth. So to me, that was a major trigger, and it influenced a lot of my sort of reflections and learnings. The third one was the CTAC had the Pelston workshop process. And I described a little bit about that earlier, but it was a very unique process. And this is the picture of the technical framework for LCA. And, we had inventory, impact and improvement assessment was all part of that at the beginning. But that really changed my whole career. Before that, I was really doing ecological risk assessment, the effects of chemicals on the environment. But with that, it just focused in on product focus and how to embed that into, decision making. And the fourth trigger was that Anna Kuros, who is the woman, because my wife is Jane, is on the right, and Anna is on the left there. Anna Kuros was head of delegation for Costa Rica. And so went to the ISO meetings, and she and I got along pretty well, and Jane would come to the ISO meetings. I got along with Anna. And so in the early 2001, Costa Rica was interested in expanding environmental education in Costa Rica, and that's what Jane does, is environmental education. So she invited us to spend a week providing training to local municipalities, to the federal government, to businesses on environment, product sustainability, life cycle, environmental management kind of thing. And we did that. At the end of the week, we hired a guide and went bird watching, all over Costa Rica. And we fell in love with the culture, the people, the wildlife. The bird watching, we're big bird watchers and wildlife watchers. And we said, of all the places in the world, even New Zealand, although New Zealand was second in our thinking about retirement, but it was Costa Rica. It became out number one, and we said we could retire then, and that was like 2001. And so in 2017, we bought a house here in Costa Rica, and we moved here full time, and we live full time overlooking the Rio Baru watershed, which is what Jane did, and the Pacific Ocean. So these are the four triggers, and in a much longer talk, there's a lot of stories and a lot of good information associated with what happened during those things. But I would like to focus on just a couple. So this is the work that CTAC, and I guess Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, and what they had developed, and I mentioned this earlier, was what's called a multi-stakeholder consensus process. And it was called a Pellston workshop because it was developed initially in Pellston, Michigan, which is a small little village and area that you could have a workshop at, kind of thing. And the 4 books that are here, the technical framework for LCA, the impact assessment, data quality, and code of practice, really followed that CTAC workshop process. And it's been followed by many people, a lot of the UNEP CTAC work that they did on development of data quality further through the UNEP CTAC, follow that Pellston workshop process. But it really was critical because these 4 books that when I've shared this about a year ago, a lot of people who have read them and didn't even know they existed because they heard about ISO. They went in and looked at it and they said, wow, this framework on impact assessment laid out pretty much where we are today, although there's been a lot of advancements and great improvements, but that was really, key to that. And so I really feel this is really valuable because it was really informed the ISO, UNEP CTAC, and a lot of the work that's being done globally. And so I feel very proud of being able to be part of that. And I was fortunate enough had the ability to actually chair, a lot of those workshops. The other thing that I want to highlight was it's more of a paid, that was a volunteer work, is back in the early 90s when we first started ISO, we talked a little bit about what at that point it was a life cycle assessment roundtable, but we ended up establishing this group of multinational companies who got together 2 times a year, maybe 3 times a year, representing multiple supply chains. You can see the group here is pretty much all over, but they had people who were customers, people who were product providers, people who were on the supply chain, and they really shared conversations about what is this thing called product sustainability? What is this thing called life cycle assessment? Why should I care? Why should I bother with it? And then if I do understand what and why, how do I act? What do I do? What are the actions I need to take? So it really became a very impactful group of folks who, when you read the testimonials, will say that activity, when they were involved, was very instrumental in really helping them understand what is product sustainability, what is life cycle, and how do you use that to drive business value. Not just a greener product, but a product that's greener, but also creates business value. Sharing instead of growing revenue. Impacting the whole reducing costs, brand recognition. There's all kinds of business value associated with it. So this was what I really felt was a key milestone and direction in my career, is this whole product sustainability active. And one of the things that I always did on the PSRT meetings, I always say, when you're into the 2-day or 2.5-day meeting, I want you to identify at least 1 or 2 things that you have learned that you will take action on Monday. It was do really action-oriented activity, not just learning, but we want people to take action to really make change. So one of the things that we have done a little bit recently is this whole area of working with Barb as part of the rapid prototype work that we had done with American Center for LCA, the Forum for Sustainability through Life Cycle Innovation, and CTAC. We had a sort of a collaborative effort. And we really tried to develop, with a sort of the vision that we have here on the right, is that sustainability, life cycle thinking, that knowledge is at a similar par as safety, performance, cost, reliability within the design to commercialization process to create more sustainable products that also achieve positive business impact. It's a lot in that words, but that's where we're really headed. And the question is really how to make that happen. I think we all understand what it is now and why it's important. But I think what's really critical is how we all work together, recognizing that we have to break down the silos. We have the sustainability folks, you have the life cycle folks, but you have the product innovation folks at the, on one side, and you also have the business managers who have the money activity. And we all have to bring those together and get to the point where you break down those silos. So we're co-creating a situation that we are getting the sustainability information at the same level as the traditional, decisions that are made by, by companies in the product design process. So these were success factors that we came up with. And I think a couple of them that really stood out to me was that life cycle literacy is built into students' curriculum. If we're not saying how you do LCA, you don't necessarily have to get to the point where you're running a software and collecting the data, but what is LCA? Why would I want to use it? And then how do I use it? If I'm in engineering or if, from a business manager's perspective or procurement. So this literacy is not just building our capacity to do LCA, but it's also building the capacity of folks who are using that information to really create, business value. So this is a important part of going forward. And I just like to sort of close with these were 6 sort of reflections. And I think this is sort of indicative of where I came from in my career and how Jane and I interacted and so forth. But family first. Include always attending family meetings. Unfortunately, I failed at that. And Jane will remind me over and over again. I was on the road all the time. And because I had clients all over the world, so we were spending a lot of time. But it's if you to the extent you can, family first. The second one was no surprises. You really have to have a sort of behavior where you're working with the client or you're doing a project, something always comes up. And surprises happen. And you just have to be open and honest and share the outcome of the problem with the client or your boss, and then co-create a situation where you're solving that problem together. The third one was we team. It's not like what I do. So when a problem comes up, I always thought about, well, how do I solve it? Well, no, that's the wrong question. The question is how, who's the right person? So it's a we team, not an I team. The fourth one is really all about understanding your strengths and weaknesses. And I said earlier, I'm not really one that really understands, really talk well or actually, get involved with idea generation. But I'm I'm very good at asking questions. I'm very good at listening. And I'm very good at interpreting the outcome. And so I developed a process where I built off that understanding of what my strengths and weaknesses are. And I ask those questions. I listen, I learn, and analyze, and then I sort of spit back or we come back to them and say, "This is what I heard," kind of thing. So that was the fourth. The fifth one is really as sort of part of the process of the Pelston workshop. We would document what we agreed to. Many times you get in a debate where you get NGOs and government folks and business people together in university. You come in, you talk about everything you disagree on. But what we had to do when we learned that we document what we agree on, and then agree to disagree or agree to decide what you still need to have resolution on, and then develop a plan to resolve it. And it really was amazing when we did those Pelston workshops. We had all the debate on the things we disagreed with, but when you started writing down what we agreed on, that was really the foundation for all the technical framework for LCA. Was there's a lot we agreed on, but there was a lot that still needed to be done. And the final part of this is what, why, and how. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. What is it? What's the vision? Why is that important? And then how to get there. So I feel these were the 6 learnings. There's others, but these are the ones that I felt was most critical that I really wanted to share with you today. And this one I won't say other than I've been working on this, and there's some podcasts and a variety of other things that are being talked about. But we really have to get to the point of how do we scale the use of lifecycle information so it's delivered on time to influence decision making, to generate more sustainable products and processes. And so there's a lot of work going on by folks about how to make that happen and how to really engage the product managers, the people who are responsible for the developing and commercialization of product. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Barb, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And if you ever get down to Puerto Rico, our Puerto Vida, Costa Rica. You please look us up, and I'll be more than happy to show you around. Puerto Vida.
Thank you so much, Jim. I always get something new out of your reflections. I do have a few questions, and there have also been questions coming in. So you've basically given us the framework on goal and scope definition first, then inventory analysis, impact assessment, and then interpretation, which are the 4 phases of an LCA. If you had a chance to do it all over again, is there something else? Would you change some of that?
Yes, the answer is yes. There's interesting 2 things. One was that when we first came out in the technical framework, we didn't have goal and scope definition. We just had, inventory and impact and in that case, improvement. And in the ecological risk assessment, which was my background, we had what we called a problem formulation. What's a problem before you do the ecological risk assessment? And so I took that thinking, and in a meeting in one of those workshops, we brainstormed it. And so let's call it a goal and scope definition. So we added the goal and scope definition from the first workshop. But the biggest regret that I think I have in the whole early days of LCA is that we called it, coming out of the Vermont workshop on technical framework for LCA, we called it improvement assessment. It was, at that point, it was inventory and impact. And in fact, frankly, people have said if the work wasn't through society, environmental toxicology and chemistry, you probably wouldn't have had impact assessment, because you would have just had inventory, which is the traditional way of what's done, mass balance kind of thing. But CTAC added the impact assessment, and we had a bunch of NGOs who were there, and one was Michael Bumgart from Cradle to Cradle, and he came in over from Germany, which was a great addition because Michael was like brilliant individual. And they came back after going to dinner one night, and they said, you just can't stop with the assessment of impacts. You have to do something with the results. And so they said, let's add impact or, improvement assessment. So we did that. Everybody agreed. And so the whole power of the LCA was not just doing an analysis and interpretation, but actually making change. So that's how we came out. Unfortunately, there were some lawyers involved in the ISO standard writing process, and interpretation was really what they wanted, because that allowed them maybe not to do really anything. They could just interpret the results. But we always wanted to make changes. And so, unfortunately, through the ISO process, we've changed improvement assessment to interpretation. And not that interpretation is wrong, but you really want to drive change. And so when I go back, I would have loved to keep improvement assessment. And quite frankly, when I talk about LCA now, it's all about improvement. It's not about, just interpreting. We want change. We want a new product that's been modified, designed, and brought to market.
That's really interesting, because that is, I think, where a lot of the value of most LCA products actually is, in that, well, we call it officially interpretation, but it's in these what can be changed. So let's internally agree with, let's call that improvement. A question that I often get is, what is the hardest phase in an LCA? That must be the inventory and the calculations. I actually tell people it's the goal and scope, because you really need to work out what is it that you want to do and what is LCA actually good for, because you can't do everything with LCA, right? So one of your 10 golden rules, I think we've put them in the chat, is that LCA is essential, but not sufficient. What exactly do you mean with it?
When we came around, we started in LCA, people said, well, LCA, you get the answer. It covers everything, because it's not just, a toxicity issue or a water issue. It covers a whole broad range of impacts on human health. But when you start realizing it, if I'm a designer and I'm making a decision on a product, environment is only one aspect of it. So, if you're looking at LCA is essential for product design, then you also have issues related to the scientific studies. You got issues related to existing standards, stakeholder concerns. and so forth. So LCA is essential to give you the hotspots along that whole value chain, the whole system. But to make change, you also need to have all this other information. So LCA is essential, but not sufficient.
Mm-hmm. Yep, agree. There are a couple of other questions that have come in from people. One is, what are the most utilized changes in business towards sustainability? That's a question from Ashley. The most utilized changes in business towards sustainability. I guess, what are businesses really changing to be more sustainable?
Yeah, I think what I think they've been doing the most is on reporting and carbon disclosure projects and science-based targets related to climate. And there's a lot of activity on a reporting, early GRI kind of activity. But I think, and I'm talking with Neil D'Souza, who's the CEO, founder of Maker Site. He and I are talking about some podcast kind of thing. And we're really, to me, the focus of what the greatest change is in the product innovation. The products, are designed, manufactured, used, and then how they're managed at the end of life, the circular economy. But it's got to be, to me, it's, in at least for businesses anyway, companies make money by selling something. And if you get to the point where you're embedding the life cycle information into the whole stage gate product innovation process, like Johnson & Johnson did with Earthworks, and Unilever and a number of other companies have done that, they really created a greener and green products that's good for the environment and also good for business. So to me, it's embedding life cycle perspective into the innovation process is where I think the biggest change and long-lasting change can occur.
Thank you. I think that almost answered the next question, which is from Manoj. He says, thanks for your reflection on your career. It was really great. Just wondering if you could provide some insights around opportunities and challenges on embedding modern day LCA into business decision-making processes. So the opportunities, I think you covered, that would be around product innovation. Do you see any challenges?
Yeah. Let's see, we had a product sustainability roundtable meeting, and we were at BSF in Germany, and it was an interesting conversation because I was, part of the meeting, I was meeting with the CEO and the executive management team, and they were 100% behind sustainability and direction. And then at the same time, a little bit later than that, I had dinner at a local pub outside of the manufacturing there in Germany. And I met with workers, employees, and they said, oh yeah, we're in favor of all this sustainability stuff. So do that. But then we went with the PSRT, and they said, really the problem is that the middle managers do not have sustainability in their goals. They have senior managers, the executive, if they talk to the shareholders and so forth, and sustainability is there. Employees want to act sustainability, but the dilemma comes is that what turned out to be a sort of a slogan for us: how do we unfreeze the frozen middle? And so, to me, the biggest obstacle about really making change in companies is to get that mid-level management understanding that there is a business value for them to create more sustainable products. But then the organization's got to give them the business bonus incentives to basically allow that to occur. Right now, if you don't have the financial incentives for the business managers, it doesn't come on their radar, kind of stuff. So anyway, that I think is how do you the frozen middle, and the goal for all of us is how do you unfreeze the frozen middle?
That would be the key. Okay.
It's not so easy, but if we understand, that's where we're all working on. And then the role of the LCA folks have to translate, and the eco design people. I mean, it's just a co-creation kind of activity and breaking down the silos.
I think this translation piece is something that you often talk about. That I think it's one of the other golden rules, actually, that you need to understand the language of your audience and just translate it into their audience. Final question. Does every LCA need to follow those LCA standards that you have helped writing?
I would say yes and no. I think in general, yes. I mean, the reason the LCA standards were put in place was to ensure that people were honest and there was the right checks and balances, to make sure that the work was done, done correctly. And I still think that's important. And there were more rigor if you're going to make a statement that my product is equal or better than a competitor's product, kind of thing. But I think there's a lot of application. And what we found through the work we did with the rapid prototype, is that, you have like 3 different areas at the initial stage of ideation. There's a lot of existing LCAs that can be used that are maybe streamlined LCAs that follow the standards conceptually, but not down to if you audit down to the nth degree, you can check off 99%. But it gives you the direction. So if I'm in ideation and it says, well, water, energy, and materials of concern are your 3 major issues based on sort of screening level LCA, you don't have to get into the details of all the data, but you give the designers something to focus in on in the whole decision-making process. The second phase in the ideation or in the design innovation process is, when you're to select material A versus material B. Now there you might be a little bit more rigor in your LCA, but still maybe not the full, right? And the third phase, you're ready to go to market. And you want to say, hey, now my product looks like it's really going to be greener than the previous generation or a competitor. I want to make a claim. I make a claim, I got to follow the ISO standards, to the comparative assertion component. So to me, you look at that, the typical innovation process in Johnson & Johnson and a lot of companies we worked with have that. So in the ideation phase, you can more streamline and directional. And material selection, you have a little bit more rigor. And then if you want to make a claim, you got to follow the full ISO standards. So that's how I would sort of answer that question.
Bit of a hierarchy, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with that, you've even answered another question. Someone asked, how would you approach LCA of emerging technologies and novel products that have no inventory available? I think that was a perfect answer for that question. And you can also use some proxies if you have ideas of what the materials would be, but just don't use those to make any claims.
Right, exactly.
I do know that we stand between you and dinner because you're dialing in from Costa Rica and it's already the evening over there. So I'd like to just really thank you again, Jim, for sharing some time with us, sharing some really good advice on what to look for when doing the LCA, to be pragmatic about it as well. That's what I really, really value is you have written the ISO standards, but you still kept that pragmatism of what actually is useful. Use the standards where you can. Also, LCA essential, but not sufficient. So I think those are really, really great insights. And we hope to see you again in one of our webinars and for another visit down here. And we'll certainly come and look you up in Costa Rica.